Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to sift through the noise and get to what really matters. Today, we're tackling something pretty heavy, definitely sobering. We're looking at surviving a massive global conflict and, well, the environmental fallout, what people call nuclear winter.
Yeah, it sounds like something straight out of fiction, doesn't it? But, with global tensions being what they are, governments are actually discussing this kind of scenario. For this dive, we're drawing on official disaster prep guides, some hard science on climate effects, and even a fictional but really eye-opening survival story that gives a vivid picture of how things might play out.
Right. And look, our goal here isn't to scare anyone. It's about knowledge. What would that world even look like? What are the immediate dangers you'd face? And importantly, what can you actually do, maybe starting now, to better your chances? Not just surviving, but maybe, just maybe, helping rebuild. We'll get into everything from the initial impact, treating injuries, even how you might trade for basics when, everything collapses. It's grim stuff, but essential insight. Okay, let's get into it. So for a lot of people, the idea of a World War III feels distant, almost unreal. But you mentioned governments preparing, like European nations, Sweden, Germany, they're openly telling citizens to get ready. What's that about?
It's a definite shift in mindset, yeah.
Right.
It's not just about having a basic go bag anymore. These are like full-on national strategies. Stockpile food, water, emergency gear. Sweden's guide, if crisis or war comes, it really pushes mental readiness, knowing where shelters are. It's framed almost like a civic responsibility.
Huh. Civic responsibility.
And Finland, sharing that long border, they advise 3 days of supplies, even pet food, heating. Germany's talking 10 days of food, 5 days of water, plus cash. It's clearly moved beyond just natural disaster prep. It's a direct reaction to, well, the geopolitical climate.
And our sources, particularly that survival story, it paints this picture. Submarine-launched warheads turned Europe's great cities into molten orange horizons. Most people just never saw it coming.
Yeah.
But then there were these, quote, handful of crazy preppers in bunkers who made it. What did they have beyond just the supplies? What was their edge?
Foresight, definitely. But maybe more than that, it was an understanding of how fragile our systems are. I mean, yeah, they had the underground bunkers, the air filters, radiation detectors, months of food,
Yeah.
all that. But the real insight, they anticipated total system failure. Think about it. Communications, banking, power grids, all potentially wiped out at once by cyber attacks and EMPs.
Electromagnetic pulses,
Right.
frying electronics.
Exactly. So everything digital, gone.
All right.
In that world, even simpler prep gas masks, iodine tablets, flashlights, basic hygiene, some small bills, that stuff becomes incredibly valuable. It really shows that when the connected world just vanishes, self-reliance becomes paramount. You're on your own, essentially.
Okay, so the initial blast is horrific.
Yeah.
But then comes this nuclear winter. It's easy to think the explosion is the main danger, but the research points to something maybe worse long-term, right? Can you break down what nuclear winter really is? People misunderstand it, I think.
Yeah, that's a common point of confusion. It's not really about nuclear debris blocking the sun, not directly anyway. Nuclear winter describes the severe, long-lasting global cooling effect, but it's mainly driven by smoke. It's triggered by massive firestorms, like cities burning, forests burning, ignited by the explosions. These fires pump enormous amounts of soot way up into the stratosphere.
So it's the smoke, not the blast itself, not the immediate fallout, but the smokes from the fires that follow. That's the long-term killer.
Precisely. The models show that maybe 100 large city firestorms, or even a similar number of big conventional fires, could lift enough soot high enough, and then solar heat actually pushes it even higher into the stratosphere. Up there, there's no rain to wash it out, so it just stays for years. It creates this layer, sometimes called a smokiosphere, and it blocks sunlight globally, drastically.
Okay, and the consequences of that,
Yeah.
that long darkness. You mentioned famine sounds almost unavoidable. Is there anything in the research suggesting ways to lessen that or any, unexpected factors?
Well, the outlook is pretty bleak. The models point to a global average cooling of maybe 7 or 8 degrees Celsius for several years, still 4 degrees colder even after a decade. That's climate change at a speed and scale we've never seen. Colder than the last ice age, actually,
Right.
over farmland. Temperatures could drop 20, even 30 degrees Celsius or more. That means killing frosts. Massively shorter growing seasons, maybe 10 to 40 fewer days per year for 5 years straight.
So yeah, widespread famine.
Absolutely. Studies estimate maybe 80% of the global population could starve. And here's the really chilling part. Maybe 90% of those deaths would be in countries not even involved in the war itself.
Unbelievable.
And on top of the cold and dark, you get massive ozone depletion. We're talking 20–50% less ozone over populated areas. That means a 30–80% increase in harmful UV radiation. Bad for people, bad for ecosystems. Is there hope?
Well, the research looks at things like massive food stockpiling, maybe underground or near the equator, unconventional food sources too, but the scale of the problem is just immense.
The survival story talks about this darkness that went beyond the loss of electricity, the sun hidden, constant twilight, dropping temperatures. And besides the physical horror of radiation sickness, the nausea, fatigue, hair loss, it really hits home on the psychological side, the fear, the isolation. How did the sources suggest people could even start to cope with that? Yeah, the physical symptoms will be brutal and obvious. Nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, exhaustion, hair loss, bleeding gums, sores, unmistakable signs of radiation sickness. But you're right, the psychological burden, constant fear, isolation, grief, could be just as devastating. Suicide rates could spike significantly. Anyone exposed to high radiation or who ate or drank contaminated stuff, they'd get sick first. Coping, from what the sources imply, really boils down to connection and having a purpose. Shared struggle, celebrating small wins like finding food or water, just being with others. That can help push back the despair at least a bit.
So protection, right away, becomes everything. The story mentions improvised stuff like scarves soaked in water for masks, raincoats and plastic bags for clothing. It seems basic, but the idea is any protection is better than none. What's the thinking there?
It's simple risk reduction, really. Every barrier helps, even a small one, when the alternative is direct exposure. Are wet scarves or plastic bags ideal? Of course not compared to proper gear. But they can offer a slight, maybe crucial defense against breathing in or touching radioactive dust. Even if it's just a psychological boost, that counts too. Obviously, people with actual gas masks, proper filters, full protective suits, they have a huge advantage. They can move around more safely, maybe lead others to safer spots. But for most people, using everyday items for some protection is a vital takeaway. Adapt what you have.
Okay, switching gears a bit. Clean water and medical help, they'd be worth more than gold. Let's talk water. We know you need it fast, but what's the one key thing people absolutely need to get right about making water safe in a crisis? Why do people mess this up?
Right, dehydration hits fast side effects in hours, death possible within 5 days. It's serious. The absolute key distinction, the one people often misunderstand, is filtration versus purification. Filtration, think of it like a strainer. It gets rid of the visible gunk dirt, sand, sediment. It might even catch some bigger germs like bacteria or protozoa like Giardia.
Makes it look clean.
Exactly, looks clean. But the crucial point is it probably won't remove tiny viruses. They're too small. For viruses, and to be truly safe, you need purification. That means actively killing everything invisible. You do that chemically with iodine or chlorine, or physically boiling or using UV light. Viruses are sneaky. They slip through most filters easily, so just filtering isn't enough. You must purify.
Okay, what if you don't have fancy filters or tablets? Can you DIY something that actually works?
Well, the sources describe making a filter. Plastic bottle upside down, layer cloth, charcoal from a campfire, sand, rocks. It definitely helps clear the water, gets rid of sediment, maybe some bigger pathogens. But, and this is a big but, campfire charcoal isn't activated charcoal. It doesn't have the same microscopic structure to trap chemicals. And critically, it still won't get rid of viruses.
So better than nothing for cloudiness, but not safe on its own.
Correct. You still need to purify that water after filtering it through a homemade setup. Boil it, use chemicals if you have them.
And what are the best ways, the pro methods for purification? What are the catches?
Boiling is king. A good rolling boil for at least 1 minute kills absolutely everything. Simple, effective. Fuel. Finding enough fuel to boil water constantly would be a massive challenge. Chemical options, iodine or chlorine tablets, drops are great. Portable, kill most things. Downside. They take time to work, usually 30 minutes or more, and sometimes leave a taste. Then you've got UV light purifiers, pens or bottle caps. They zap bacteria and viruses quickly, but the water has to be clear first, so you need to pre-filter, and they need power, batteries, another resource issue.
So trade-offs everywhere. Depends what you have.
Pretty much. Each method has its pros and cons in a collapsed world.
Okay, beyond water, injuries. When there's no 9/11, No hospitals.
Yeah.
What's the core mindset for first aid in that kind of chaos? What are the real goals?
The core mindset has to be calm, deliberate action. Panic is contagious and dangerous. The main goals are 1, stop the victim's condition from getting worse. 2, don't create more victims, like don't drown trying to save someone if you can't swim well. 3, make it easier for potential future help if it ever comes. And 4, maybe most importantly, reduce suffering. It's about doing the most good possible with very little damage control.
And if there are multiple injured people, a mass casualty situation, how do you even decide who to help first? Seems like an impossible choice.
It's incredibly tough, but there's a system, triage. You focus on those you can actually help the most. Prioritize people with minor injuries who might then be able to help you. Deal with those panicking to calm the scene. If you can, help trapped victims first. But the harsh reality is, if you find someone who's clearly deceased, you have to move on, focus on the living. And for someone with multiple injuries, there's an order. Airway and breathing issues first, then major bleeding, then loss of consciousness, then broken bones. You tackle the immediate life threats.
Makes sense. What about specifics? Bleeding, burns, broken bones. What are the absolute must-know basics?
Okay, bleeding. Stop it fast. Losing more than about 20% of blood volume can be fatal. So direct pressure on the wound, bandage it tightly, tight enough to stop the bleeding, but check circulation below the bandage if you can, like feeling for a pulse if they're unconscious. You don't want to cut off blood flow completely unless it's catastrophic bleeding.
Right.
Burns. Cool it down immediately to stop the damage going deeper. Pour cool, clean water over it for several minutes. Then cover it with something clean, a sterile dressing if you have one, a clean cloth, even the inside of a young banana leaf, apparently. The big don't for burns: don't put butter, grease, or random ointments on it. Just clean water and clean covering.
Okay. Broken bones.
Broken bones.
Yeah, mobilize.
Stop the broken ends from moving. That means splinting the limb so the joints above and below the break can't move. Use sticks, rolled up newspaper, or whatever's rigid, padded with cloth. You can even use the person's own body tape an injured arm to their chest or a broken leg to the good leg. And the absolutely critical point, underlined, bolded: never try to push or pull the bone back into place yourself. Just stabilize it as it is.
Okay, crucial point. And what about suspected back or neck injuries?
With suspected spine injuries, minimal movement. Keep them flat. If you absolutely have to move them, use a hard, flat surface like a door or a wide board, and keep the head, neck, and back perfectly aligned. No other first aid attempts. Moving them incorrectly can cause paralysis or death.
Got it. Stabilize, then move carefully if needed. So once injuries are dealt with, getting people to a safer spot is next. How do you manage evacuation? And what's the key for moving someone unconscious?
Evacuation is just moving someone to a safer area, maybe for more help later, or just away from immediate danger, like a fire or collapsing building. Ideally, you wait until they're stable. Breathing okay, bleeding stopped, conscious. But if the current spot is too dangerous, you might have to move them sooner. Methods depend on how many people you have. 2, 4, 6 people can carry someone carefully. Sometimes one person has to drag someone in a tight space. You can use proper backboards if available, but more likely you improvise. Doors, ladders, sturdy blankets, even large sacks can work as makeshift stretchers or drags. For an unconscious person, the golden rules are protect the airway and protect the spine. You want them in a recovery position if possible, unless you suspect a spinal injury.
Right, the recovery position. How did that work again?
You typically lay them on their side, one leg bent, head tilted back slightly to keep the airway open so they don't choke on saliva or vomit. But again, you absolutely do not do this if you suspect any neck or back injury. In that case, it's flat on their back, minimal movement, keep the airway clear manually if needed. It's risky business without training.
Okay, so let's fast forward. You've made it through the initial chaos, dealt with injuries, found some water. People start emerging from shelters into, well, ruins. That survival story mentions scavenging parties and not always friendly encounters. It paints a pretty dark picture of human nature under pressure. What does that post-shelter world look like?
Yeah, that's when the reality of resource scarcity really bites. The story describes groups meeting, and basically the ones who shot first were the ones who walked away with the supplies. It's a brutal illustration of how social norms can just completely evaporate. People might do truly terrible things to survive when pushed to the absolute limit, but it's not all darkness. The same story highlights how the prepared individuals, the ones called hazmats, because of their gear, they actually became the new leaders.
That's fascinating. So the crazy preppers become the leaders. How does that shift happen? What becomes valuable when money and status are gone?
Exactly. Foresight becomes power. New little communities started forming, usually around essentials like a clean water source or a hidden stash of food. The hazmats with their gear, their supplies, but maybe most importantly, their knowledge, how to test for radiation, how to purify water properly, basic first aid, they naturally became the leaders. It's complete flip. Your old job title, your bank account, meaningless. What matters is, can you contribute? Can you find food, fix things, keep people safe? Practical skills and resources are the new currency. And with money gone, bartering becomes the only way.
Right, bartering. The lifeline. We think of trading food or ammo, maybe, but what are some of the less obvious, maybe surprising things that become really valuable bartering chips in that kind of collapse?
Well, sure. Precious metals, gold, silver, they hold value historically, less prone to inflation than cash. Non-perishable food, medicine, first aid gear are obviously huge. But beyond the tangible stuff, information can be incredibly valuable. Knowing where there's a safe path, an untouched building with supplies, even just reliable weather info, that's gold. And then there are skills, highly specific, practical skills and services.
Skills. Okay, beyond fixing engines or growing food, what kind of skills suddenly become indispensable?
Think about craft skills, someone who can make or repair clothes, shoes, basic tools, someone who knows how to make soap or candles from scratch. That's huge. But also, think about less glamorous things. Basic sanitation, managing waste safely to prevent disease, community organizing, getting people to work together, water purification expertise, even someone good at mediating disputes becomes vital. These skills directly help the group survive and function. They're highly sought after. The advice for bartering in this world: know what you need, know what you offer, build trust, be fair, be honest, be flexible, and maybe keep track of deals just for clarity. It's about rebuilding society, transaction by transaction.
Looking even further out, that nuclear winter scenario, how does that mess with growing food long term? And what are some of these almost sci-fi sounding solutions the research mentions?
Yeah, the cold and lack of sunlight basically mean traditional farming is off the table for years. That's the global nuclear famine scenario. Mitigation involves massive food stockpiles, ideally protected underground, maybe at higher altitudes or near the equator to lessen UV and radiation effects. But the really wild ideas involve finding ways to make food without sunlight.
Food without sunlight.
That's right.
How does that even work?
It sounds crazy, right? But researchers are looking at things like using natural gas to feed specific types of bacteria that are edible, or fungiculture growing mushrooms on damp wood, which doesn't need light.
Mushrooms. Interesting.
Yeah, or even chemically breaking down inedible cellulose like wood pulp into usable sugars. Seaweed is another option. It can grow in pretty low light. And even common plants like dandelions or pine needles could provide vital vitamins. One theory suggests mushrooms alone, if farmed intensively, could potentially feed everyone for maybe 3 years. It's a total rethink of food.
Wow. Okay, so the lessons from this whole thought experiment, the simulated war, they're pretty deep. That every man for himself idea seems to give way to realizing we actually need each other, maybe more than ever.
Absolutely. The accounts show both sides of humanity, don't they? The potential for awful depravity, people fighting over scraps, but also incredible resilience.
Yeah.
Preparedness, knowing skills like farming, basic mechanics, even marksmanship, it becomes standard issue, not just for nuclear war, but for any major disaster. And it completely reframes those crazy preppers. Suddenly, they're the heroes, the ones with the foresight and skills to lead the way back. Knowledge becomes power.
So this deep dive, it's definitely laid bare the potential catastrophe of global conflict, the horror of nuclear winter. But strangely, it also shines a light on resilience, on ingenuity, on how people might find ways to recover.
Yeah, what really struck me is that shift in narrative. From total destruction to the absolute critical need for individual skills and community cooperation. The preppers becoming the leaders because they simply knew things and had things others didn't. It really drives home that practical knowledge, actual skills. That might be the most valuable thing you can possess when everything else falls apart.
So what's the takeaway for you listening right now? Maybe it's not about living in fear. Maybe true preparedness is actually about finding peace of mind. It's about learning practical skills, understanding basic survival needs, water, shelter, first aid, and maybe, just maybe, building stronger connections in your community now. Because while we all hope desperately that none of this ever happens, being informed, being capable, it means you're not just another problem to be solved. You're potentially part of the solution, part of the collective strength we'd need for any uncertain future.